All right. Hello. Today is September 25th, 2018. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. Before I dig into some of the details with regards to the agenda items, I wanted to give a PSA that I had reached out to several sub-projects to try and bring them back into the fold, to sort of have a venue by which they can give a global update and sort of have a conversation about things that are germane to everyone who's working on cluster lifecycle related things. So I reached out to the KubeSpray folks. They said they would be joining a little bit late today. I had also reached out to the Minikube folks, and they said they would be joining today. So hopefully we'll get the status update from them later on. I also wanted to have a conversation with both everyone who's been using kubeadm with regards to, and using Kubernetes in general, with regards to dynamic kubelet configuration and the thorns that exist there around that stuff. There's a bunch of issues that we have uncovered. And we wanted to make sure that people are aware and don't have that set as the default currently, or if they do have it set as the default, they might be able to give some update or insight into some of the current conundrums that we are seeing. So with that in mind, I see Ant31 has joined. Did you want to give a brief KubeSpray update?
Yeah, sure. So, hey, I'm Antoine, working on KubeSpray. So this last months have been quite crazy. We merged like more than 100 of PR. So we have a lot of change and activity from many contributors. So mainly like some highlights, we just integrated like cryo support. So we can choose between Docker and cryo now as a container engine. Same, we integrated also IRM support for the control plane. So both of these features are quite experimental. We still need to add a CI to officially support.
So when you say you add support, is it native support or is it integration through existing deployment mechanisms?
I'm not sure to understand the question.
So are you deploying cryo with that version and you are setting it up your own installation configuration, or are you?
So the way users do, like, so you have like two things to edit with KubeSpray. One is your inventory, where you list the machine, how to access. So it's Ansible based. You basically put the IP of each machine. And the other one is a YAML file with parameters. And one of them, it's container engine, and the value is either Docker or cryo. And you just choose one of them, and then the automation will just install everything that is required to use cryo instead of Docker. For IRM, it's a little bit more automatic. It will just SH to the machine and see which arch is it, and then just pull the correct image to the machine. So there is no flag to set up. It will just deploy the IRM image or the binary or the AMD 64. Yeah. So around this kind of support also, we have an initial work on supporting workload on Windows. And yeah, that's very early phase. But the idea is like using KubeSpray to be able to use multiple Arch and hybrid cluster, ARM, Windows, Linux. So that's one work. We have been working a lot on the CI, also migrating to adding some bare metal on packet deployment. Since we have like a lot of PR coming, we need like able to scale the CI we are doing. Yeah, I think that's the highlights. Maybe I see there is Chad. If you have anything to add, I probably missed some PR. I say there is like a lot of change. There is many plugin, network plugin, Contiv, Calico. We get like many contribution around network plugins. Okay.
So I have some questions. Let me check chat here real quick. Somebody sent a private message, which is weird.
Sorry, that was me, Tim. If you want to make me co-host, I can manage people joining the meeting, so you don't have to worry about it.
Okay. I thought I set it up to make co-host. I thought I set it up so other folks can just join randomly. I changed this meeting invite. So the questions I have were regards to like mixing meta topics with regards to mixing back into the fold for broader CI signal and for broader sort of awareness of when a release is coming and the current state of releases and discoverability. So like the KubeSpray project had lived in the incubation organization, but that is deprecated, right? So there's no graduation path for it. There's no way, it's no happy home to live in perpetuity. Ideally, we would like to find a happy home for KubeSpray, whether it be underneath the Kubernetes SIGs org, which is the most common place for subprojects. And that way, and the second question with regards to that is to get CI automation in place. So that way, as people are developing Kubernetes, they can actually are getting, the latest Kubernetes binaries deploy using KubeSpray and getting CI signal as part of that, as part of the process. Do you have thoughts on either of those?
For the CI, I will take the CI as concept. So first, in the incubation, I think since the beginning, so KubeSpray, I started like with Kubernetes 1.0, so it's more than 3 years of development now. I think we already requested to be graduating when it was like still a thing to go to the Kubernetes org. And since like in 3 years, I think we still like a lot of contributor, a lot of activity. So, and the project, I think it really makes sense to keep it in the Kubernetes ecosystem. There is no, I would say, not a single company working on it, sponsor. Is really a community effort. So my only point, like to go to Kubernetes 6 is like more compared to other projects. I would more see every project go together. So there is like, I think Minikube, KOps, KubeSpray, either Kubernetes SIG, or Kubernetes cluster lifecycle. But I don't see like too much. This is going to Kubernetes, this is going to Kubernetes, and this is there. So
I work on the steering committee too, so I'm taking off my SIG cluster lifecycle hat and putting on my steering committee hat. So part of the steering committee has been to rationalize the organizational structure so that way it makes sense and is consumable to external observers as well as developers, right? And part of that was to create an organizational structure where SIGs can sponsor sub-projects underneath those SIGs, right? And this is all documented. It's in the community repository. And incubation is deprecated. We no longer want to support or maintain incubation at all. So bringing folks back into the fold underneath this Kubernetes SIGs organization allows them to have a home like SIG cluster lifecycle for this. I kind of converted this meeting so that it's more broad and can apply to everyone who's working on cluster lifecycle related projects, not just one or the other, right? And then it has a much more clean organizational structure for them to produce artifacts and have a communications venue that it gets a larger pool of folks all talking about similar things together. So from a steering committee perspective, this is the way we are rationalizing the organizational structure, right? It's going to take a long time. We're not trying to force people into it. So from taking off my steering committee hat and putting on my SIG cluster lifecycle hat, I would say it would be nice to have folks come back along into the fold and to have standard meeting invites and have the KubeSpray folks give status updates, because this is useful information, I think, for everybody.
No, that's, I think since the beginning, we're under like cluster lifecycle, and I say we already request to migrate to go out of the incubator. My just point I say is like all project, I would say the lifecycle sponsor should be like in the same place, same
Yes.
GitHub repo. So like KubeSpray could move whatever the SIG decides, but will be like more alongside with other project, and it helps discovery. Like say we have a page like say in which case you would like to use kubeadm or KOps. We try to be as much neutral, and it's easier to explain when everything is on the same organization. So it's
yeah, and I'll say like COPS graduated before the Kubernetes SIGs org, and it would probably make sense today if we were graduating to go into Kubernetes SIGs. And I guess how we're trying to square that away is trying to take the functionality or the code out of the Kubernetes kops repo and put it under Kubernetes SIG. So like you can see, I have an item on the agenda later for like taking out the etcd management and putting that into a Kubernetes SIG project. So the hope is that while it's a bit of a, it would be pretty disruptive right now to move Kubernetes kops to Kubernetes SIGs kops, we can start getting the bulk of the development happening in Kubernetes SIGs. Like some projects in Kubernetes SIGs under SIG cluster lifecycle is my goal, and that's what I'm going to propose later on. So it's not perfect, but it's moving in the right direction, I think.
I think
to play devil's advocate, Justin, what would be disruptive about moving it that like wouldn't be disruptive for the Kubespray folks if they're moving from incubator to SIGs?
I don't think anyone should ever have to move their projects. I think it's a lot of work. It's disruptive for people that have like all the people that have forked it, then have to like have a massive fork that breaks every Go import. If we didn't use Go, maybe, or didn't, if we didn't use there's imports, then it'd be all right. But
there are examples of this succeeding well, of doing it with even though
absolutely. Like kops has already moved. Like I think kops this would be like our fourth move for kops. So we know how to do it. It's just it is disruptive and it's painful. And like the more users you have, the more painful it is. And I think it's just So my personal view is, sure, if there's a good reason to do it. But if we want to I think moving the bulk of the development into the Kubernetes SIGs is sort of a more balanced way to do things. And hopefully, like maybe we can do the same thing with Kubespray. Like if Kubespray and kops and kubeadm have common functionality for etcd, as the one I propose later, right? Let's get that into a project under Kubernetes SIGs, and let's move that development under Kubernetes SIGs. And we are moving the center of gravity under Kubernetes SIGs, even if we have some artifacts that live under different names.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think having a certain level of jurisprudence, because people are dependent upon these projects and doing things incrementally where it makes sense, is useful. But I think as long as we are trying to aim for a long tail game of rationalizing the structure so that it's discoverable, understandable, manageable, and maintainable, as well as being able to have a unified voice through the community, so that way when we give updates, not just one project takes precedence. You have an update about all the projects, right? So I think that's useful too.
Yeah.
So this is one thing, rationalize like all projects. And speaking just to Kubespray, I think there is like less issue from what Justin described in terms of dependencies. We already moved, like Kubespray was named Cargo at some point. We got trademark issue. We rename it Kubespray. It happened without too much trouble. So I think moving like tomorrow, like in the next release with some preparation to Kubernetes SIGs is more than doable for us if it's a first step.
Okay, we can talk more about it too, and I could send the Kubespray folks details. I think that's kind of an administrative detail. I think the CI signal is a highly useful thing that I would like to automate across subprojects, because currently, and as well as not only CI signal, but as well as best practices. So for example, the defaults for kubeadm, making sure that they're consistent across people that are using kubeadm, right? Or the defaults for the system are similarly vetted, so that way every deployment, every configuration management tool is using similar type of defaults. Like the earlier topic I mentioned was dynamic kubelet configuration, right? There are a bunch of thorny issues with regards to that. And if people are kind of independently defaulting to turning it on versus having a conservative approach, they could expose the broader ecosystem to a bunch of other larger problems, right? So I think,
what do you mean by CI signal? Sorry.
So currently there is a bunch of test automation that exists inside of the test infra project that presents a test grid type of dashboard to the SIG leads and the release managers for a release, right? That signal is highly useful for debugging and getting a release in order. And Lubomir can talk for quite some time, including, and Ben the Elder can too, with regards to some of the issues that we discover every time there are on a per PRs that come in, that all of a sudden we find out that some knob being enabled here causes the entire system to fail in some strange way, right? That was totally unexpected, right? And I see Ben turn on his camera and is nodding, right? So, so having that signal earlier in the cycle before a release gets out the door is super beneficial if there is deviation between the configuration management tools for deploying a cluster.
So my thinking here is that we should probably write a kubeADM specification in terms of what are the default parameters for all the potential consumers.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I have a question, like how do we want to present all the sub-projects like KubeSpray under the sequence lifecycle tab in TestGrid? Is that the plan for the future?
For something like that, the answer would be yes. For those, because they are different cluster lifecycle related subprojects. So I think adding that signal is a useful thing.
So just something a little bit related. In KubeSpray, we decided for the next, not this release, the next one to go full on kubeADM. So currently we have like added, you can deploy cubes, like the cluster using KubeSpray with kubeADM. It's been like experimental. We deploy also our own static manifest. And on the next release, we all agree to say we drop the option to deploy like the KubeSpray manifest, and we only use kubeADM. This would be like the default and probably the only option to deploy the cluster. So going more, so we're probably going to open some issue on kubeADM as we have some requests. We already have some, not necessarily blocker, but workaround we will like upstream, so etc. So I think it is a good direction to work together.
Yeah, I think this is a proper venue too to talk about those issues too as we see them. All right, well, I know that I invited other people to talk. Are there any last minute or last topics with regards to KubeSpray that folks wanted to address before we move on?
One more administrative thing. We do have KubeSpray meetings set up every other week. Should we get those added to the community meeting calendar?
I think that'd be great.
What's the process for getting those added? Just submit a PR, or is it documented somewhere?
So there's no PRable way to add things to the calendar itself. That's like Tim or I has access to add things to the calendar.
Okay.
But there is a site in the community repo that lists all of the meetings. And so if you send a PR there, we can use that to create the calendar invites.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Great.
And it also should be at the top of the doc. I don't know if it's linked at the top of the agenda, right? Or is it linked at the top of the agenda?
Yeah, it is. For others. We'll add it there. Thank you.
Cool. All right, the next meta topic of bringing folks together to give updates was I reached out to the Minikube folks. Is there anyone from Minikube that wanted to talk?
Hi, yes, nice to meet you all. So my name is Balint. I just joined the Google Container Tools team, and Thomas is here on the line as well. So from Google, we are restarting the investment into Minikube. So that's one news on our end. And so we are both new to the project, so we are ramping up. And there's a third person as well who's working on it. So the current focus, what we see for Minikube is stabilizing the CI, so that anytime you raise a pull request and it's good, then that should be green. So that's some basic state that we don't have yet on the PR. So that's one on the PR. So that's one of our key focus. The other thing is somehow achieving better user experience. So there are stability issues with Minikube that we are looking at, and we triaged all the outstanding issues on GitHub. I'm sure if somebody followed the GitHub repo, then you've seen the labels that Thomas mostly put on the issues. So we are actively looking at them and trying to identify the biggest pain points, and we'll come up with a plan to tackle them the next quarter. The other thing that is coming is we are in discussion with the Red Hat guys, the Red Hat team, Minishift team basically, on switching over from libmachine, which is currently deprecated in the Docker repository. Minikube is still pointing to that, but Red Hat migrated to Machine Drivers Organization most of the code, so that's what we're going to repoint to. That's coming up as well soon. The Kubeflow team worked on the GPU enablement as an experimental feature. So we spun up a node for testing that as well. So Minikube will have GPU support. So as long as there's a freestanding GPU on the host node that can be passed in through the hypervisor in KVM. So currently this is Linux and KVM only. And then you can run GPU test. You can run workloads that require GPU in Minikube as well. Minikube Tunnel is on the way. That's something I've been working on the last couple of weeks. So that's basically a load balancer emulation locally. So we're closing the gap between the local environment and the test and production environment, where currently you would have to define expose your services as a different type. So if you use load balancer type in production or testing, locally you would still have to use node or node type so that you can access it, node IP. But with Minikube Tunnel, we'll create a route to the pod CIDR, so you will be able to actually address the pod IP of the service IP, so the cluster IP of the service. So that is coming, and we are planning a release this week. There's not much change since 0.28.2, so I'm thinking that it's going to be 0.28.3. And that's all for now. I see questions from Tim in the agenda. So,
yeah, I just added questions while you were talking, because there's been like long-standing things that I've talked about with other folks, but we've never actually had a conversation in a SIG meeting with regards to it. The first question that gets brought up a lot with multiple folks is the idea of multi-node Minikube deployments. Is there any thought with regards to enabling that feature, the status of that?
It came up marginally, as I'm aware of the requests. We haven't pulled anything into the roadmap around that yet. So that's something that we can circle back. So having said that, as I'm saying, we're ramping up. So I can definitely circle back to the original Minikube maintainers. We are in touch, and we can discuss all of these things and reevaluate our position on this. But currently, we don't have it on the roadmap, on the near roadmap. That means Q4. So anything is possible next year. Docker and Docker versus virtual based.
Yeah, so there are so many different small setup environments for doing almost like developer testbed type of installations, Minikube being one, and there's many other DIND based solutions. Has there been any thought or conversation pieces on the Minikube front about potentially leveraging existing type of DIND solutions, or was it the intent to still stay vert based behind the scenes?
Good question. I have not heard anything specific to this. There's kind that I've seen, and we will have to evaluate that. This is an interesting question. Definitely testing and integration testing is an important use case that we acknowledge that's one of the use cases for Minikube. So I'm still in the process of understanding like how that can fit in the roadmap. But yeah, nothing concrete yet. I will circle back on this one as well.
Ben, who's like, in the grid here, Ben, who's waving his hand, is the primary person who's been working on Kind. So.
Oh, cool. I'm more than happy to catch up and then
Sure.
have discussions about this.
Yeah. Ideally, I would love to see like the distillation of a lot of these topics that kind of go in a circle to kind of like have a happy home and landing where we can kind of agree to disagree, but have clear lines of like what tool you use, when, where, and why, and how. Because right now, a lot of times people will come to us and be like, what tool should we use? And they're like, well, here's all the tools. Find one that you like. And then they bump into an edge, right?
For the moment, I've pointed people away from Kind for the most part, since it's so alpha, but I've also said that, like, for a lot of things, vert-based is a better idea, if nothing else, for security. Dind mostly gives you less overhead and plays nicer in RCI.
So that kind of plays into my next question, is a well-defined client library for all these separate tools. If people want to use it for CI automation to do auto spinning and auto provisioning and auto stand up and pull down and tear down, if there's any plan to have a well-defined, not API, but client library for consumption.
So this would be a client library for all languages that we would.
Well, primarily for Go imports, right? Like a lot of the folks that are using the automation or building their own CI infrastructure have an import path for some client tooling that does the auto stand-up and management of these different things and configuration, right? Because usually what they want is they want to tweak it for some level of automated CI infrastructure, myself included. So this is partially my greedy someone's self-interest, but I get asked the question as well. So if there's a client interface or a client library I can vendor, I can build CI automation around it.
Let me circle back on that one. I'm not aware of any effort on that direction yet. I mean, there's one thing that I'm gonna follow up on that one. Okay. So feel free to add me to these as a follow up, and then how frequently is it? This is weekly, right? So
this meeting is bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly. So for the next one, I'll come back with some answers.
All right. I've exhausted my sort of reach out, my community effort to reach out to folks. Are there anyone else that are working on different sub-projects that wanted to give a TLDR on what's been going on?
I can give a very quick TLDR on COPS, which is the big thing for COPS is that etcd3 is being deprecated in 1.13. So we are adopting etcd Manager, which is a project that we are splitting out from COPS. And I have it on the agenda later to propose as a SIG project. But that's sort of our big thing happening in COPS right now, which is, as well as moving, keeping up with Kubernetes, getting everyone using the sort of fully managed etcd, which can upgrade and downgrade and go from single node to multi-node and all that sort of stuff. And do backups.
I can give a quick update on the cluster API for folks that aren't in those breakout meetings. Phil Wittrock and I are hard at work trying to get us migrated over from extension API servers to CRDs. We're hoping to have something ready in PRable test passing form within the next week or so. And so that'll be a big shift for the folks in that community.
Are folks who have not been deeply involved in Cluster API know what Cluster API is and its intended focus? I think kubespray and COPS and Minikube have been around for a long, long time, so it's pretty well understood what their role is. But not everyone understands yet what Cluster API is and where it lives in the state space and the stack, et cetera.
Sure. I mean, I think that, Lubermir just linked in chat to the repo. There's also a KEP. I think one of the first KEPs we had from our SIG about Cluster API. Basically, we're trying to create declarative Kubernetes style APIs for both machine management and sort of cluster definition. And the goal there is we saw a lot of blossoming of different ways for people to manage their clusters. And products like COPS sort of started down this road of COPS has sort of Kubernetes API, we'd like to create sort of a standardized way to describe your machines. So we can, do things like plug in the autoscaler and have the autoscaler work with the machines API and have that be consistent across clusters, no matter how you are managing them otherwise. Alexander also asked why we want to move back to CRDs. So there was a doc we wrote a while back. We started off on CRDs for the initial prototype that we shared at KubeCon last December. And then we switched to the aggregated API server for sort of a number of technical reasons that CRDs didn't support what we were looking for. Since then, the development of CRDs has significantly picked up, and the emphasis has been on pushing pretty much everybody to CRDs and away from API aggregation. And CRDs are actually picking up pretty much all the features that we found to be lacking. We thought we were going to move a little bit faster than we did, and we thought we'd need the features sooner. But it turns out that CRDs are moving faster than we are at this point, and are adding the features that we need. It turned out we were sort of pinned on Kubernetes 1.9 definitions, and people wanted to do something a little bit newer since Kubernetes 1.9 is getting a little long in the tooth. And the tooling that we were using is getting pretty old and is unmaintained. So Phil joined our meeting a couple weeks ago and described that the code hasn't really been updated in 9 months. It's not going to get updated, the code that we had been using, and that we were likely to have it work sort of reasonably well in small sort of prototype or even alpha beta scenarios. But once we got to production, we were likely to hit sort of known edge case bugs that were going to cause significant problems. So moving back onto sort of the supported path using Kube Builder and CRDs seemed like a really good move, both to get us up and working on sort of more current versions of Kubernetes and to increase our supportability burden going forward. So there's sort of more discussion about this at a recent meeting. I can link to the notes or the video of that if people are interested. And then Tim, I don't know if you want to give you or Lumer wants to give a quick update about kubeadmin as well, as long as we're going through the projects.
So with regards to kubeadmin, we just finished up 1.12 release. The big things that we're finishing up is there's been a long process of slowly migrating the configuration to a well-defined, well-supported path. We currently switched to V1 Alpha 2 for the configuration file, and that's starting to split apart the dependencies. Ideally, we want to get into a state where folks can vendor in the configuration independently without having to pull in all of Kubernetes. There's been a problem in that the original configuration subsumed parts of component config, and then it kind of sprawled into the whole system. So ideally, in the future, once we get to V1 Beta 1, we have the ability to cleanly vendor in, which will be in the 1.13 cycle. We have the ability to cleanly vendor in the configuration so folks can use that configuration for the setup of other tools that depend upon kubeadm in a cleaner fashion. As I mentioned before, we have defaulted to a version of kubelet configuration in 1.11, and we continue it in 1.12. It is not fully dynamic kubelet configuration, and we have opinions on why we don't do that. Full dynamic kubelet configuration is an opt-in feature, but there's a bunch of thorny issues that we've uncovered along the way with regards to setup and configuration. We have not fixed those issues yet. Our plan in 1.13 is to go and address and fix some of those things. There's a broader effort that was started within our SIG, which Lucas has kind of piloted and been somehow working on in between being conscripted in military service, to push component configuration into well-defined API groups that can be, again, cleanly vendored in. So that way you can have a cleanly defined, well-versioned API type that folks can depend upon for configuring the separate components. Again, this is highly useful for folks who want to be able to vendor that stuff and be able to control that programmatically. Because as all of us who have worked on cluster lifecycle things know, configuration flags are the devil. And they have bitten us numerous times across numerous releases. So having a version configuration with up-down conversion apparatus built around it is highly useful for us. So that's like the TLDR from the 60,000 foot view.
Question about that.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, are you thinking of embedding the component config types into the kubeadm configuration, or is it going to be
we are splitting them
bundle, should we say?
It is a bundle, right? Like we're just separated bundle. We do not want to embed it. That was the problem we had. So originally it was embedded, and now we are splitting it apart slowly. And we are splitting apart the configuration for kubeadm into separable sets of configuration types that are germane to each focused area. So that way we can have, with the generate config, it will generate the appropriate thing and give you all the different elements laid down. And then you can edit that as needed.
Awesome. Cops hit the same problem and is trying to go the same direction, but sounds like we're a little bit behind you in terms of speed of development.
Lubomir, are there other things you want to add?
We are basically separating the separate configuration types in a single file with the 3 dashes. You can separate the multiple structs in the same YAML. And that's the path we are going for currently. And we're going to see what feedback we get from the users in 1.12. I also wanted to add that another effort from Lucas was the multi-arch support. And this is quite experimental, but we now at the Google GCR bucket, we support all the different architectures that you can use to spin a cluster, like the IBM mainframe ARM64 and stuff like that. One problem here is that the CNI is not ready yet, so that's why we are marking this as experimental, but we made a big leap forward in terms of the multi-arch support for 1.12.
Another detail which has not been, it's not been clearly disseminated is that we've updated default support in CI testing automation to support Docker 1806. It's kind of, it's total kludgy right now, and we'll be clean it up in 1.13. But we have default support for Containerd 1.12 and Docker 1806 as the default CRI runtimes that we've have some level of CI signal. It's not, again, it's not very clean, but our plan is to clean this up in 1.13. I think we've hit are there any other sub-projects that we need to discuss or want to get an update from? It's a lot of stuff. Should we go on to the next agenda topic? Yes. All right. Cluster bundle.
Hey, that's me. I'm Josh Hoke. I'm working at Google, actually with Robbie and Justin. So the cluster bundle actually sounds kind of related to some problems that you were describing, which is at Google, we were having kind of a problem of how do we package up all these manifests together and what granularity should it look like, and even how do we express these as Kubernetes types. So the cluster bundle is a project to organize components or like applications, Kubernetes objects into version sets of manifests. And then those are collected themselves into a bundle, which is a set of applications. So I shared the project on the agenda. It's pretty early still, but starting to try to integrate it into some of the work that we're doing internally at Google with regards to like GKE and GKE on-prem. So,
how does this overlap with things like, all the other sort of apps state managers that do sort of templatized ASIN for their manifests, like Helm and Ksonet and the other tools around that space?
Oh man, yeah, that's a really great question, and there's a lot of work here. I think one of the things here is this is taking a couple ideas, newer ideas together. So for example, it relies on customize or operators for the customization of manifests. That's one addition. The other addition is it's really, or maybe I would say subtraction, is it's really just focused on collections of Kubernetes objects. It doesn't have much more than customization and the Kubernetes objects. So in that sense, it's like a little bit similar to Helm. And then a third aspect is that it's Kubernetes types that you can actually apply them to clusters. So that there are a lot of overlaps with, I know there are a lot of projects in this space, but it's a notion that we found a little bit useful at Google. I don't know if maybe Justin or Robbie, you can speak to some of the comparisons of the packaging systems out there, because there's
well,
a lot.
I will bring up that I was eagerly awaiting this going up on GitHub, and when it went up on GitHub, I talked about it with the COPS community at a meeting, I guess a week ago or so, and they were very excited by it. It's a huge problem in COPS is that we don't have a way. What we need is a way to specify manifests for the things that we install in COPS, and currently the way we do that is, I'm ashamed to say, we sort of bake it into the binary. And the bundle seems like a great answer for how we get that out of the COPS binary, but also, like going back to the thing we talked about earlier, even out of the COPS project. Like, it is silly that COPS has a version of Calico that is specified, and Kube Anywhere probably has one, and I'm sure maybe if Kube installed one, it would have one too, and I'm sure Helm has one too. So I don't see it as exclusive, like excluding Helm. I see it as like a common language for describing the manifests that all tooling can consume. So again, moving the center of gravity away from COPS into SIG cluster lifecycle.
It seems like a great way to manage add-ons, right? And sort of the add-on set of components, because it's very difficult to get, especially across these different providers. It's almost fractal. And if we can rally that core add-on aspect of just getting, you get your bootstrap and then you get your core add-ons, and you get the key pieces you need as part of a simplified bundle, that would be highly useful, I think, to a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think it also fits in, Tim, with what you were saying earlier about the split up of the KubeADM API surface, and then how you do things like specify, I want this controller manager, and here's the config for the controller manager. And the way that the bundle schema works is you put those sort of two things together and call that like a component or an application, and say the application that is the controller manager, here's all the pieces of that. If it needs RBAC roles, or if it needs a service account, or if it needs a specific configuration for that application, you put all those pieces together, and they kind of get shipped as one thing. And so, yeah, I think it might apply well to add-ons, but it also applies to sort of the core control plane pieces as well.
Yeah, and I would say the slight difference between that and like a dash separated YAML file is there's a little bit more structure that makes it easier to work with.
I eagerly want to investigate now and take a look at it and see if we can incorporate, because I think if some of the promises hold true, it would be beneficial to a lot of different areas of the code base. Because as anyone who was on the last release knows, we did massive levels of binary twiddling across cluster and KubeADM and God knows what at the end of the cycle, and that just is not fun.
I think this makes a lot of sense. We should definitely investigate it for KubeADM because right now our control plane manifests and the add-on manifests are hard-coded even, and we definitely need something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I would the problem that Justin was describing that we're having internally also is that a lot of this stuff gets sort of hard-coded, and the format, if you will, of that gets sort of baked into the binaries and gets very sort of specialized for binaries. We sort of wanted to step back and say, what are the commonalities here? How can we describe this in a way that it can be used across multiple tools? Even if the specific application definitions start to diverge, if the sort of schema for how you specify those and how you combine them into the definition of a cluster starts to get standardized, then we can build tooling on top of that. And it also becomes really easy to look at deltas between tools. So you might say, like, here's the way that COPS is installing Kubernetes 112 and how it configures the control plane. Here's the way that kubeadmin is installing 112 and how it configures control plane. Like, why are these flags set differently? Like, that would be a really powerful thing for us to be able to see.
I like it. Sounds great.
Yeah, so I guess one other thing to say about it, Josh stuck it into the Google platform org. That is by no means saying this is like a Google-only project. It just seemed like it was sort of too early in its infancy to try and propose sort of SIG sponsorship or CNCF ownership at this point. But we are open to moving it if it becomes sort of an integral piece of our SIG going forward.
Right, that's absolutely true. It's still in alpha. So, and before we moved it to beta, we really want to get some community buy-in and feedback.
And we're planning on adopting it in COPS, so get to beta fast.
Are there any last questions with regards to bundles? So we have two etcd topics related at the end. Not controversial at all. Let's let's start with Daniel.
Yeah.
Or is it David or Daniel? I forgot.
Daniel.
Daniel. All right,
yeah, I wanted to share a tool that that we wrote and been using internally for a few months. It's a CLI to help operate etcd clusters. We're using it in an environment where there are no infrastructure APIs and actually air gapped. So I can do if we have just a 2 or 3 minutes, I can do a quick demo. If that's okay. I'll share my screen. Just give a sense of the. Let's see. Here we go. I think. Let me know if you can see the terminal there. So I've just got three Core OS machines open up, and I've got etcd-adm binaries on each of them. So I'm going to run etcd-adm init on the first one. So this is a workflow that's completely taken from kubeadm. So big tip of the hat there. So the idea is it's very similar, right? You can run init on one machine that'll get a single node or single member cluster up, and then copy over the CA cert and key to another machine and run etcd-adm join there. So let me just do that. So I'll copy over the CA cert, and then I will run. Actually, I think I have that. Let's see. Yeah, etcd-adm join on the other machine. Now we've got a 2-member cluster, and then we can do, for instance, just check, oops, sorry, member list. We can do a little, sorry, endpoint help dash cluster. Just so now we've got this 2-member cluster, and then if we want to, for example, remove, or actually, let's go and remove this. This first member that we had, we can do etcd-adm reset. Locally, it will call the etcd API, make the cluster reconfiguration or member API call, and then bring down all the local components. And this one should still be going just fine. So yeah, that's very briefly. That's what the tool looks like. That's what it's like to use. And I'm going to stop sharing unless there any questions about the demo.
That was very cool. So the reset removed it as well? Or did I just miss it? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did the reset remove the node as well?
Yes. Yeah. Let me go back. Yeah. So yeah, the idea is that when you do a join or an init, when you do a join, you provide a current etcd endpoint, and that, of course, the first thing that the join will do will create all the certs, so then you can talk to the existing cluster securely, right? And then it'll do a member add API call, and then it will configure all of the. So it actually starts etcd as a systemd service. It'll configure the initial cluster, all the different parameters for etcd, and then start the service. And then when you do a reset, first thing it'll do is it'll query the existing cluster, say, hey, we're removing this member, and then bring down all of the local components. So we've been using this tool for a few months. I noticed that recently there has been, it looks like kubeadm is taking up, bringing up an etcd cluster itself. So I wanted to see what sort of overlap there is here with kubeadm. Also, etcd manager. etcd manager is a great tool. I think when you have infrastructure APIs and there's an external source of truth that etcd manager can use to decide when to when a member needs to be added, or when a member should be removed because it has permanently failed. For instance, an instance has been terminated, and let's say the AWS EC2 API can tell you that this instance is gone, right? So it should be removed from the etcd member list. But this tool is specifically to be used, or specifically to be used, delegates sort of the membership decisions to something else. So, in our case, it's on premise, it's the operator, but perhaps something like this could be actually used in concert with etcd manager, where etcd manager is doing something, at a higher level, and then delegating the sort of host local tasks to something like etcd ADM. Anyway,
yeah,
so
I was just gonna.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yes, I was looking at that and thinking, wow, like you're downloading etcd and doing all that, and installing systemd, and I'd love to have those things as options. And to me, it makes total sense to have this as a layer, and then like etcd manager would just drive that. Like it can be one project, and so like etcd manager is supposed to work on bare metal as well, but it certainly works better on the cloud. And it, as you say, like it tries to elect a leader and make that decision. But it would be nice also to say, well, some people don't want to go full automation and want to have like a little bit more control. And for those people, they can use the toolkit directly, and we rejig etcd manager to effectively like call etcd ADM calls. To me, that makes a ton of sense. So you can even see like I'm doing an etcd ADM backup, and like etcd manager has a backup format. I'd love for us to share a backup format. And obviously, if we built on top of etcd ADM, we might need a better name, etcd admin, we could get that sort of automatically. So yeah, I think this looks great. We don't have a lot of time, so like my next agenda item was to propose etcd manager as a SIG project. I might revise that now and say, why don't we propose a SIG project for etcd management and get etcd ADM in there and get etcd manager building on top of it, rejig to build on top of it. Like I would love to not have to like vendor each etcd version.
I had a quick question about host OS support. Like what host OSs are you guys testing against, or what do you plan on supporting? Like how broad is how deeply tied are you to specific versions of operating systems?
It's a great question. Right now, we develop on container Linux, and we're going to be testing against Ubuntu, CentOS. Our assumption, or etcd runs as a systemd service. I don't believe we're using any systemd, sort of. We're using the sort of stable systemd functionality. So across the different distros, it should just work. We would be happy, very happy to basically add, CI paths for all the different distros, and whatever distros or whatever OSs the community is interested in, that's where we'd like to go.
I guess the other question along those lines is you guys using systemd as the sort of the watchdog for your etcd cluster, which means are you running etcd in a container or not in a container, like as a host process?
We are not running etcd in a container.
Okay, because I think that's the other thing that would be interesting to discuss is like I know a lot of people that are using Kubernetes like to run sort of everything in containers, and whether it's useful to run it in a container or not. I think there's some nice things about containers where you can, especially if it's underneath a kubelet somewhere, you can actually see resource usage and so forth pretty easily.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, like etcd manager currently runs in a container and runs etcd underneath, which means we have to like bake all the versions of etcd into that container. But I think there are different outputs here. Like one mode could be we output a systemd unit file. Another mode could be we output a manifest for etcd and etc Kubernetes manifests. I don't actually see them. I imagine that would be a very, I don't want to say like it's easy, but I imagine it'd be a relatively small code change compared to some of the other stuff. To be able to like have different targets for people that do want to run systemd versus pod effectively.
Yeah, we had this discussion in the beginning, whether to run etcd in a container or not. We found that, the trade-offs, questions around Docker stability, how to ensure like disk disk I/O for containers as opposed to system service. I think I agree with Justin. There's nothing that stops etcd-adm from having as an option spin etcd up in a container as opposed to a system service. It's really the tool is really about just automating some of the mundane host specific tasks. Deriving the environment, writing all the configuration, those kind of things. But yeah, it could deploy it to the container too.
Yeah, I will say the one thing to worry. Sorry, 1 second. The one thing to worry about is if we do add like an option for everything that everybody wants, then it starts to become like less opinionated and probably less stable over time as we don't test every single different configuration. So there is some value into having an opinion and sticking with it.
I was just going to say we're T-minus 2 minutes from wrapping up, and I would love to see like a unification around proposals for getting this stuff into a home that everyone can, a happy home where people can collaborate on. I don't know if you wanted to modify a current proposal you might currently have, Justin, and send out to the list.
I was just going to suggest that, like, I think what we've done in the past is sort of do like a straw poll where if anyone like has an objection, they feel free to speak up early to save us the time. But then I am happy to work with you, Daniel, to like come up with a unified proposal for, I don't know, we'll call it etcd management, but some sort of thing that incorporates etcd-adm and some sort of automation that works on AWS on top, and then COPS can leverage that automation. So we're sort of building on top, and it's nice and predictable.
Yeah, I think Cluster API set the standard bar for like how sub-projects can kind of federate off, and then have the concrete proposal of what it is you're trying to do and what it is you're not trying to do, where the boundary lines are drawn, and how you can consume it, and what's the intended purpose. And then that makes it super easy, and then we do the thumbs up, thumbs down vote from there. I think there will probably be unanimous acceptance of the idea, but having a proposal that we can agree upon beforehand usually helps to demarcate the lines and make it clear to everyone what it is that we're voting on.
I guess it's just if anyone has any concerns about like immediate demarcation, it'd be great to hear them either privately or now. I think that'd be wonderful.
I want to make sure we loop in the API machinery folks, because I think that they might also believe that they own some of these pieces, and figure out sort of where the line is. Maybe there's some co-ownership, or maybe they're happy to give it to us, or maybe we're happy to give it to them. So that's the only thing I would say there.
Yeah, they don't care about management, so to speak, of the cluster. They only care about versioning as a person who managed that stuff forever. They only care about the version of the client library interface that matches the server. And ideally, I'm looking at the Google folks, ideally, we can, get rid of the cluster directory and not have to sort of do PRs across the infinity of bash scripts when we're trying to update the server information, right? So. We're at time. Are there any last topics that folks wanted to discuss? This has been really good, by the way. I think bringing everyone back into the fold has actually been highly useful.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for doing that. It's been great.
I'd just like to throw out, I think, I missed your name there, but you're working on the etcd admin. I heard Daniel, looks like you're doing all of this offline. If you have any notes about pain points with air gap, I'd be interested in those. I'm kind of interested in seeing if we can get some kind of like mock air gap to CI at some point.
Yeah, okay. Reach out to you on Slack.
That'd be great, thanks.
All right, on that note, thanks everybody.